Hi, my son and have a claim against UAMS for false imprisonment and assault, and against my son, battery. And we're looking for an attorney to represent my son. I would continue to represent myself and do a lot of the legwork. And I am accepted to law school. And maybe by the time this case is finally complete, will I'll have graduated. But in the meantime, I think my blog subscribers um, might be interested in how UAMS is putting profits over people. So there's a second case that's going on right now. It started in 2022. The conduct that led to the lawsuit happened in 2020. And it's a case of Tyrone Washington versus different police officers and I think the Board of Regents of UAMS. And that case, it's similar, or it brings up some good points about my son's case and my case, because my son was admitted to UAMS after taking a fall off a ladder, and he went to the emergency room, and we're glad of that. Everything was done right up until my son asked the emergency room doctor to stop doing what he was doing and let my son leave. And he said he felt fine, and the problem was he had aphasia because there was a subdural hematoma pressing against the language center of his brain. And that doesn't change the cognitive area of your brain or your reasoning, but it made him sound strange. And then UAMS started pumping him full of drugs. And those drugs made him more confused, groggy, really very almost delirious at times, but not. It was obvious that it was the drugs doing it. And as the drugs wore off, he would be fine again, and he'd be able to beat people at checkers and beat people at poker. But then UAMS would just pump him up with more drugs, and they would restrain him, hands and feet, 4-point restraints, sometimes even across his chest. And of course, this made him agitated, and then they would give him more drugs because he was agitated, and they were giving him enough drugs that they could have killed him, seriously, easily killed him. Um, and all of this, we think, because of an opportunity to make money. And so the Tyrone Washington case is contrasted in many ways. So Tyrone Washington was poor. He had been seen at UAMS at other times. My son hadn't been. And Tyrone Washington was, I believe, on like Medicaid, or maybe didn't have insurance at all, but he definitely did not have money. And my son, when he got to the emergency room, had $1,000 cash on him. He was going to play poker and that night, and he just had cash on him. And he had been working when he got in this accident. He had been working at $1 million home not far from UAMS, and they mistakenly thought that the house belonged to him. So they wrote some notes in their notes about him working on his house. So they also decided, based upon information they got from my son's girlfriend, they didn't contact either of us, but she went looking for him the next morning and found him at the hospital. But they had not made any attempt to contact anyone in his phone or go on Facebook, though they had his name, they had his wallet, they knew how much cash he had in his wallet. So, anyways, I'm digressing like usual, but this whole thing is so upsetting to me, even now, like a year and a half later. Um, so they thought that he had money and they thought he wasn't going to qualify for Medicaid. And so they just kept him there, and they kept him there for 2 weeks. Um, he argued, he broke loose of the 4-point restraints in a spectacular display of physical fitness. And they tackled him to the cot. I watched them throw his head into a wall of the elevator that he was escaping in at one point. Um, it was just so obvious, they would catheterize him against his will. He'd pull the catheter out because he wanted to escape, and they would reinsert the catheter again and again. So, but Tyrone Washington himself went to a different hospital, um, to St. Vincent's, I think it was Chai, and he was turned away from St. Vincent's, and he walked to UAMS, to the emergency room, and he was obviously having some kind of a mental breakdown, and UAMS turned him away. And then when he was walking around the parking lot, he saw a truck with a pressure washer on it and keys in the truck. And he gets in and starts driving around the parking lot. And he'd stop occasionally and ask people if they saw someone with a machete. So UAMS has a police department that does more harm than good. And one of the officers shot Tyrone Washington in the face and killed him. And all agree that she had told him to stop the vehicle and that he put his foot on the brake, and then she shot him in the face. I don't even know why they are arguing in court. I mean, they should just have admitted fault and then let a jury decide how much it was worth. But instead, the attorney and the hospital decided to, and the police decided to file a motion for summary judgment and, drag this on for years. The attorney, I forget offhand, but I know she makes either $160,000 or $260,000 a year. It's public record. And so that's just one attorney, and there's several attorneys on the case. And, all the costs of litigation. But the only reason I could see that they kept my son against his will and they would not admit Tyrone Washington, who asked to be admitted, is because they thought they could get money out of my son. And Medicaid ended up paying, but They paid less than half, significantly less than half of the bill that UAMS expected to get from my son. And UAMS did eventually, after 2 weeks, let my son leave AMA without tackling him again and without doing any more physical damage to him. And so they expected for him to stay significantly longer. And of course, by the time he got out, they would own all of his assets. And we know that they go after people even when their own employees have bills to pay for being seen at UAMS. They will garnish their own employees, their own doctors even have had their wages garnished. And they were just, it seems, planning to do that to my son. So hopefully somebody out there is an attorney or knows an attorney and will contact us. Mark it in the comments, we'll get hold of you, or it's easy to find our contact information on our claim. It's Laura Lynn Hammett versus UAMS and Sean Lynn versus UAMS. Thank you.